And we're live. Hello, everyone. Christine McKay. I'm so excited. I told you last week that I was coming back to you every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and I apologize because I'm a few minutes late, but I had some technical problems. So we're just going to kind of roll with the punches. So I talked last week about the reason why it's so important to be clear on what you want and know what it is that you want. In fact, that's the theme for our entire conversation this month, is knowing what you want. And I talked about the podcast last week and how I had, started down this road and I wanted something and then it wasn't going to happen that way. And I changed it. And we talked, and I used a language called general versus specific. I talked about having this general view of what I wanted, but that I didn't have a very specific view of what I wanted. And as a result, I kind of went off the rails and started doing something that wasn't aligned with what I wanted to be doing. And the concept of general versus specific comes from a very dear friend and mentor and colleague of mine, Mr. Blair Dunkley, who is joining us today. And he is on. I'm so excited to have you. And you should absolutely check out his episode, a full-length episode on the podcast, Why Not Ask? You might still be able to find it under In the Ven Zone, but Blair and I had a long conversation. We talked about a whole lot of things. It's one of my favorite episodes. But today we're going to talk about another concept that's super important in terms of understanding what it is that you want, and that is clarity versus certainty. Now, I'm in the middle of a number of deals, but I have one deal in particular where the prospect, the buyer of my client is selling their business. And one of the prospective buyers said to me, I know that we are exactly the same, that we do our business exactly the same. I know that. And that means he's certain, which means that he's not very curious. So Blair, tell us a little bit about clarity versus certainty. What's the difference and why does it matter?
Sure. So, first of all, thanks so much, Christine, for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here. Love to support you any way I can, and your people as well. So, anyway, the point here is clarity versus certainty. Certainty is all about telling. So, people tell things that are facts. Now, certainty is also a psychological principle that has had its day. But most psychologists don't actually recognize that. They think that certainty is here to stay because in society, we want things to be certain. No, we would like things to be certain. And we are living in extraordinarily uncertain times. So when things are changing as fast as they are at, an unprecedented rate and unique in the history of the world, all of a sudden, we have to adapt. And certainty does not give us the ability to adapt, be resilient, be creative, even look at things and get resourceful. We are stuck in a locked in model. And if that model does not work for us, even though it used to, we're stuck going down that path. So, and generally over the edge. That's certainty. Now, clarity, on the other hand, is all about questioning. So clarity is about seeking information. It's about getting your mind wrapped around how to be curious, how to be gain more knowledge that is hopefully fact-based, not opinion-based, that you can actually do something with it. So when you have fact-based information that you're collecting a whole lot of different things, are you certain about it? No, because it's a new situation. So we have to build the ability to be resilient, resourceful, come up with a different way of being than we were. Or do we have a single problem that with a single solution? Or do we have an ability to look at a range of possibilities? That's exactly what you were talking about. And your prospect there, the purchaser was coming in awfully certain, it sounded like to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was so certain that at one point he was shaking his head no when I made a comment that the way that the two companies operate their businesses is actually quite different. He was so certain that that was an incorrect statement that he shook his head so hard I could hear his eyeballs rattling around. It's like wow, he was definitely certain. And I like how you talk about how certainty can make us stuck. And it does, it shuts down curiosity. So when in that instance, when he's on the other, across on Zoom, shaking his head very strongly, no, that's not the case, right? It shuts down conversation. And right, it takes that curiosity away. So one of the things, so if we can agree, and I hope the people who are tuning in can get on board with the idea that certainty actually does restrict our ability to be curious. It eliminates that almost. And that clarity, I love how you put that, creates the opportunity to be questioning, right? When we're clear on what we want, it goes back to what I talked about last week on the podcast, right? I was certain I wanted to start a podcast, but I had zero clarity. Once my original plan went to hell in a handbasket, I had zero clarity on what the heck that was going to look like. So the road that took me there ended up not being the road I wanted to be on. And so that happens in this deal. It happens in other situations when we have that certainty, and what we really want is clarity. How do we move from one to the other?
Well, we have to get that person to actually answer a bunch of questions, because if we just take their information at face value, then we're buying into their certainty. So they're trying to structure the deal so that it's based around what their perception of facts are. So that if you can call into question even one single fact, not proving them wrong, but causing them to question the validity of their position, it's like plucking one single thread and having the entire fabric fall as it unknits the yarn. It just all unravels, and it doesn't take a lot to make that happen. It's rather amazing.
So how do we do that with ourselves when we're the ones that are stuck in certainty? How do we recognize that in ourselves so that we can ask ourselves an effective question? Because Blair talks about effective, he doesn't talk about right or wrong. He talks about effective and ineffective. So when we're the ones that are stuck in certainty, how can we effectively move out of that state?
Well, again, by applying questions to us. So I had a client that was literally dying, and he was stuck in a limbic loop trauma. And so his brain was locked in an emotion. He couldn't break out. So that limbic loop was there. And he just heard fact after fact after fact from medical professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, everybody knowing exactly supposedly how it was, nothing working for over 10 months, and him slowly dying and taking fistfuls of sleeping pills that would have killed you or I to be able to fall asleep, because his brain, being in a limbic loop trauma, meant he was producing adrenaline nonstop 24/7. So he couldn't sleep without massive amounts of sleeping pills, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing was, there's only one clear way that I've been able to find in all of my, years of research, and it's over 30 years now, 40 years of research and application, is curiosity. If you ask yourself to simply, sometimes all it takes is a simple thing like putting the word curiosity into the mix, into your brain, just one word, curious. Or asking the question, am I curious? Or do I know for a fact that this is true?
Mm-hmm.
The reality of it is we rarely have anything that's absolutely factual long term. We have momentary facts these days, but long term facts, not so much anymore. Although 100 years, when this whole thing of certainty got launched into our daily lives with the beginning, the birth of psychology, with the birth of the Industrial Revolution, in fact, well over 100 years ago, all of these concepts came in, and people could be certain because when the factory broke down because a gear broke a cog in on a sprocket broke off the gear, you knew that you could be certain because you could see it. Everybody could see it. It was universally identifiable. But I have an iPhone here, and the reality is that it's got 8 billion transistors. Well, it is possible that if one of them messes up, to find it with a scanning electron microscope. But the reality is that would take way too long. The whole thing here is, can we approach the problem differently? And we can, and have. So that creates clarity. So we find either what that problem is, and we query it. And even though there may be a few million transistors that are affected by the broken one, we don't need to know which one, because we can be certain that this part no longer works and replace it. Whereas before, we could be certain that the whole thing was broken. Now, how did we find that level of certainty, that level of decision? We use clarity.
So you need clarity in order to get to certainty.
But certainty is fleeting.
It's fleeting, right? Right. Now, how does trust come into that? When you talk about, like, in negotiation, right, there's a huge component around, like research, a lot of research suggests that we go into negotiations, many of us, believing that our counterpart is out to get us. And there's almost a certainty that we're going to get screwed in this negotiation. So I either going to get you first or you're going to get me. And so how does clarity versus certainty come into play when you start thinking about trust in a relationship?
Well, as you're aware, I owned a college for over 35 years, and it was called Life Skills Colleges. 80% of our student population was potentially suicidal. And we got people referred to us by government agencies, and we generally got the ones that nobody else wanted to deal with anymore. So we got the worst of the worst. So how do you wind up working with that in such a way that you just go, okay, this is the worst of the worst. This isn't what we want. We don't want to get this thing happening this way. How do you build trust? Well, what would happen if you started asking so that they engage with answers, and then you could literally listen to their answer without agreeing or disagreeing, but acknowledging that answer? Because the other emotion that people really want is to be understood. So if we can effectively paraphrase, state back in some way that isn't taken offense to, but just to clarify, seeking clarity, that situation, to make sure that you personally understand their position in whatever. If you can state that, do you think that they'll feel a little bit that there's a possibility for trust?
Absolutely.
And then it takes this other component that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's one of the mind models of risk, trust, and honesty. We have to gain trust. We can't have trust exist in isolation behaviorally. It exists in conjunction with a risk, with honesty, and trust. So it's the balance between those three that engender a true sense of trust. You can't just command trust to pop in there if you're not prepared to risk anything. In fact, it will be counterproductive because people will just gut level know that that just won't work.
Right.
And
That's awesome. I love it.
well, risk, trust, and honesty is one of those many skill sets that I teach, the mind models, literally, that embody the ability to apply what I would call real basic mind models to real world problems. And it breaks some of the, it reinforces some psychology. It also flies in the face of it because, again, certainty is what a lot of psychologists claim is what everybody is going after. Well, just because they are, it's not necessarily what they need to. And it's behaviorally, when I studied that, it wasn't the thing that people actually got to be able to make an improvement in their life. They came to clarity and then had this brief moment of figuring out what to do next, that they were certain they could do that. But the real ones that really leveraged themselves and leveraged income, leveraged their relationships, leveraged everything in their lives were the ones that were resourceful. They didn't have a single answer. They had multiple answers, generally 2, 3, or 4 possibilities in any given situation. And that leveraged them because they were resourceful and they could test on the fly with the questions, collecting clarity.
Blair, I always love having you. I always learn, I've heard a lot of this before, and every time I hear you, I'm like, oh my God, I learn so much. It's one of the reasons why I love having you as a mentor, but I love having you as a colleague. I love being able to kind of have this just amazing exchange of ideas. For folks who are tuned in, one, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Two, if anything that we've talked about today resonates with you and you want to learn more, I'm putting I'm encouraging you to schedule some time with Blair. This is his calendar link. I'll put it in the links below too, or in the information below each of the platforms that we're broadcasting to. And I would encourage you to schedule some time. He has a group that meets every Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And there's just so much that you can learn from Blair. And so, Blair, thank you so much. Clarity versus certainty. It leads to curiosity. It leads to resourcefulness. And you cannot have successful negotiations without any of those things being present. So I hope that this has helped you move one step closer to having an amazing negotiation. Check out our keeps checking out our upcoming podcast which I'm going to be doing live. And then also for me, we're going to be releasing the audiobook version of Why Not Ask, a conversation about getting more. You can learn more by texting Why Not Ask to 26786. And we will see you next time at the same time, same bat station, that whatever one you're watching on. Blair, thanks so much. And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Christine.